Okay, so you've got a little video on critical analysis coming to you from downtown Auburn, Sydney. This little presentation on critical analysis, I've called critical analysis rather than critical thinking for a particular reason. Because thinking, I think, is a little bit too vague. I mean, everyone does thinking all the time. So, but what we want to really talk about is analysis, which is critical. So let's quickly go through what that means. What do I mean by analysis? Well, analysis here is an idea that, well, I'm going to take all the way back to Galileo Galilei, and Galileo regarded analysis as a kind of what he would have called a decomposition, where you pull something apart or you dissect it into its component parts or theorized component parts and examine them in turn. So analysis here, I'm going to say, means identification and dissection of a body of ideas. First, in any kind of analysis, you want to identify the kind of object that you're engaging with. That might be, for example, a narrative, a story, a case study, an empirical report, a theory, or a model. So first you need to identify what kind of thing you're dealing with. Then you want to think about and then identify the intended audience for that. Is it other academics? Is it for the general public? Is it for intended for policymakers? Is it intended for, say, an industry group, for example? Then you want to identify its aim. What's the purpose of this thing? Might be a research, let's say it's a research report. What's the intended aim? Is it attempting to describe a new phenomenon that's been discovered? Or is it attempting to put forward an explanation for some phenomenon that already exists but has no explanation as yet, or has inadequate explanations? Or is it some kind of piece which is advocating a policy direction, for example, or what a client should do? And lucky last, you should identify the various components of this object. Now, very often it's the case, especially for you're dealing with academic work, but most other work as well. Underneath its apparent or its surface kind, a research report or a theory or a model, case study, whatever, very often it boils down to being an argument. There's an argument underlying it. There's a set of reasons put forward for a certain conclusion which is advocated. So the trick is to identify the various components of an underlying argument that's intended to persuade an audience of its truth or its goodness. So you need to identify the premises. So that can be premises, can be of various kinds. It can be axioms, assertions, assumptions that have been made for some reason or other, and then the conclusions which are drawn from that, the point of the argument, so to speak. So you need to identify premises and conclusions. That is essentially what I mean by analysis. Now, what makes an analysis critical? By critical, I don't just mean reflecting on something or doubting it, or having kind of pervasive doubts, not taking anything at face value, or another meaning of critical is just kind of complaining about things, saying, oh, that's crap, or I don't like that, or that's not satisfactory to me, or something like that. This doesn't mean that reflecting, doubting, and complaining aren't aspects of a critical analysis, but I don't think that they really get to the essence of what I think critical analysis should really be all about, because all of these things require some kind of they're psychological in some way. They require some kind of attitude or disposition on the part of the analyst. I think when we talk about critical analysis, we should think about it in terms of methodological imperatives. That is, these are rules, or they're rules that you should simply follow, whatever your personal psychological state is or your predispositions are. So you might not doubt what you're critically analysing, but nonetheless you should follow the methodological imperatives that I'm just going to lay out. And it's very simple. One is, you put an argument to the test. That is, you decide on a battery of tests which you think are stringent, strong tests of the validity, the truth, and the persuasiveness of an argument. That's one thing. Another thing is that part of a critical analysis is to examine and reveal, insofar as it's possible or it occurs, who an argument serves and why. Who's benefiting from a certain argument if it's followed, and who's losing out because of it. So this is in addition to whether an argument is valid, or an argument is true, or an argument results in or gives rise to useful effects. It's asking another kind of question: how does the argument function in a community or in a social group or in society as a whole? So this is what we mean by critical analysis, basically. It's really a kind of, if you like, a way of thinking of it is, this is cross-examination. So that's why I'm saying you don't worry about the notions of reflecting, doubting or complaining as essential to critical analysis. In the case of law, the person who is cross-examining a witness doesn't have to personally doubt what the witness is saying themselves. They don't have to complain about what the witness is saying. They simply have to examine the witness thoroughly and critically to test the truth of what they're saying, or the goodness or rightness of what they're saying. Why would we bother with critical analysis? Well, there's the intellectual purpose that critical analysis enables you to identify falsities in arguments, in intellectual work. Now, that might be errors or it might be lies. The critical analysis enables you to identify. It really focuses on, looks for errors and lies. It also enables you to identify inconsistencies or anomalies, things that just don't seem to make sense. That might not necessarily be false, but they indicate something odd is happening with a piece of work in some way, a theory or a model or a case study, whatever it is. It also enables you to discover, perhaps, the hidden function, if it has one, the hidden function of a piece of work. So on the surface, a piece of work might say, oh, well, we're simply doing an objective scientific analysis of phenomenon X, but it turns out, for example, that if you accept the scientific study that's done might be on behalf of a corporation. It turns out, say for example, that would result in that corporation being able to generate significant profit. So there might be an agenda behind an argument. So critical analysis helps you start thinking about, is that possible? Doesn't mean you necessarily find that that's the case. Remember, it's always about cross-examination. It's about looking for it. Doesn't mean that if you don't find anything that you failed, you've succeeded. If you've tested it and it survives the tests. It also helps you start to reflect on presuppositions that might exist in a piece of work. So something that the authors themselves simply might not have thought about or may have taken as self-evident or common sense, but on reflection is really a tenuous kind of a claim or a tenuous belief. So critical analysis helps to achieve these intellectual purposes. Critical analysis also has a politico-ethical purpose as well, especially for the social sciences and most especially for economics, because economics informs practices of businesses, institutions, and the formulation of public policy, which can have significant effects on both harmful and beneficial to many, many people's lives. Now, you would want to make sure that your analysis of X, whatever it is, which might have a significant consequence for many, many people, you would want to make sure that analysis is right. You would want to make sure that analysis has stood up to the best tests that you can throw at it. So this is a political and ethical purpose of critical analysis. The last thing I'll say is that some people don't think critical analysis is particularly important or particularly valuable. They don't like it for some reason. And there's usually not very many good arguments against critical analysis. Probably the most common one is that it's a kind of destructive enterprise. So people are trying to build theories or build models or put forward ideas, and then you get these annoying people who do critical analysis who come along and smash everything down or cast doubt on everything that someone's trying to do. And this is a destructive act. It's not creative. It's not producing new knowledge. Well, I think this kind of argument deserves to be subject to critical analysis itself. For one thing, it's a pretty weak argument. Just because someone hasn't put forward an alternative to something that's being criticised doesn't mean the theory or the analysis that is being criticised is somehow true or good. It's just as bad. A bad theory or a bad model or a useless case study is still bad, hopeless or useless, even if there's no alternative to it. That's one point. Another is that one should always be suspicious of anyone who says that they are opposed to being cross-examined on their own views. It would suggest that they are not particularly confident of their own views, that they don't think that their own views, they're fearful that their own views might not hold up to scrutiny, that they themselves have doubts about their own views. So I think usually when people try to dismiss critical analysis, it indicates a kind of lack of confidence in their own approach, that they don't want to be criticised. And I think that should be challenged immediately. In fact, it's a red flag that indicates you should absolutely do a critical analysis. All right, that'll do for now. I'll have some more videos about critical analysis at a later date.